It was just past 2 a.m. when the ping came through. My phone vibrated with that all-too-familiar sound, the one that signaled another late-night Lyft ride. At this hour, the roads were quieter, and the tips were usually better, so I didn't mind the late hours anymore. But then there were nights like this, nights that left a permanent scar on my memory, ones that I wish I could erase. I remember the request clearly. It came from a convenience store just outside downtown. My stomach sank when I saw the address. The store was closed, the lights dim and flickering, and the parking lot was empty. Nothing but the cold wind howling through the streets, except for one figure, a man pacing under the dim light of a street lamp, his silhouette distorted by the flickering bulb above him. At first, I considered canceling the ride. Something didn't feel right, but then I shook the thought away. It was a simple ride, right? What could go wrong? I pulled up to the curb, the headlights cutting through the darkness. The man's movements were erratic, like he was twitching, his hands trembling in the air as if he couldn't hold still. His hoodie was ragged, tattered at the sleeves, and stained with something I couldn't identify. His eyes, wild and darting, locked onto mine as he made his way toward the car. I should have driven away. I should have trusted my instincts, but instead, I unlocked the doors. He slid in without a word, slamming the door behind him with a force that shook me. For a moment, I just stared at him in the rearview mirror, my heart pounding in my chest. The silence in the car was suffocating. The air felt thick, oppressive, like I was driving through a storm without rain. He didn't speak. He didn't make a sound except for the occasional twitch of his hands. His eyes never left me. They burned through the rearview mirror, fixing on me like he was studying every detail of my face, trying to figure me out. Or worse, trying to figure out if he could trust me. Minutes passed, and I couldn't take it anymore. "You need to tell me where we're going," I said, trying to break the silence, my voice sounding weaker than I intended. "You got a destination, man?" His gaze never faltered. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady like he'd been rehearsing it in his head for days. "Ever picked up someone you shouldn't have?" he asked. The question made my skin crawl. I forced a chuckle, trying to keep things light. "Hope not," I replied, but my heart was racing. My fingers gripped the steering wheel harder, my palms slick with sweat, but he didn't laugh. He leaned forward, his face almost too close to the rearview mirror now, his eyes wide and manic. I did once. Worst mistake of my life. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. His words didn't sit right with me. They didn't make sense. There was something in his tone that was off. His lips curled into a twisted smile, one that didn't match the fear in his eyes. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end as he continued speaking, each word more unsettling than the last. "I used to be a driver, you know," he muttered, his voice growing distant, as if he were lost in a memory. "Yeah, I was just like you. But then, they stole from me, took everything I had, my car, my life, my future." I kept my eyes on the road, but my thoughts were racing. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, unsure if I really wanted to hear the answer. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he began to rock back and forth in his seat, muttering to himself. "They think they can get away with it, but they never do. No one ever does." His fingers twitched uncontrollably as he spoke, and I could feel his breath growing heavier, more labored, as though he was building up to something. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Who's they?" I asked, hoping he'd answer, but part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. He didn't answer. Instead, he stared out the window as if lost in a world that I couldn't see. And then, after a long pause, he whispered something that made my blood freeze. "It's funny how much trust you put in the guy sitting right behind you." My heart skipped a beat. I couldn't breathe. Something about the way he said it, the way his voice dropped lower, almost conspiratorial, sent a shiver of dread through me. It felt like he was saying something I wasn't supposed to hear, like he knew something I didn't. I glanced in the rearview mirror, trying to shake off the feeling that was settling over me like a thick fog. But when I looked back at the road, my stomach dropped. A police car had appeared behind me, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I couldn't see the officer's face, but the car was moving slowly. The lights dimmed, creeping down the street like it was hunting for something or someone. It was just past 2 a.m. when the ping came through. I could feel the guy's eyes on me again, boring into my skull, and I didn't dare turn around. My palms were sweating, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. Should I pull over? Should I wave the cop down? Was this some kind of trap? Then just as the cop's headlights swept over us, the guy muttered something under his breath. "You got lucky." His words sent a jolt of adrenaline through my body. I didn't know what he meant, but I could feel the tension in the car, thick like it was about to snap. Before I could process what had just happened, he slid out of the car, his movements quick and silent. I didn't even have a chance to say anything before the door slammed shut and he vanished into the night. I sat there, frozen, staring at the spot where he'd been. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something I wasn't supposed to know about. A week later, I saw it. A news article detailing a convenience store robbery. Same night, just 2 blocks away from where I'd picked him up. The same man, I'm sure of it. The description matched. Tattered hoodie, jittery movements, the whole thing. They didn't say much more, except that the police hadn't been able to track him down. I still wonder what would have happened if that cop hadn't shown up. What if I hadn't driven past that dark street, picking up that strange, twitching man? Would I have been caught up in something far worse? I'll never know. But I can't forget the feeling that lingers with me. The feeling that I was part of something much bigger than I understood. Something I never should have been involved in. That ride, it's a memory I'll never shake. And every time I pick up a passenger, I can't help but wonder who might be sitting right behind me next. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I just needed peace, some time away from the chaos of life, the constant noise, the never-ending barrage of messages, the stresses that I couldn't escape, no matter how far I ran. So after everything that had happened, I decided to get away. The Oregon woods seemed like the perfect retreat. No one around, no distractions. Just me, the trees, and the silence. I found a secluded cabin deep in the forest, tucked away from any main roads, so isolated that I couldn't even hear the faint hum of distant traffic. The kind of place where the only sounds at night were the wind in the trees, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional crack of branches shifting in the cool air. I arrived in the late afternoon, unloading my bags with a sense of relief. I felt lighter with each step away from the car, as though the weight of the world was being left behind. The cabin was small but cozy, and the solitude promised the peace I'd been desperately seeking. The first few days were blissful. I spent the mornings hiking along the nearby trails, breathing in the fresh pine-scented air, and the afternoons reading by the fire. At night, I could hear the occasional animal rustle in the underbrush, but nothing that bothered me. It was exactly what I needed. But by the 4th day, something shifted. I started feeling like I wasn't alone anymore. Not physically. No, I'd still only seen the deer, the occasional rabbit, and a few birds. But the woods felt different, as though the trees were watching me, their silent presence always there, just out of sight. But I chalked it up to paranoia. I'd just been through a lot. Maybe I needed to get out of my own head. It was on the 7th day that I met her, my only neighbor in the area. I hadn't seen anyone since I'd arrived, and I honestly wasn't expecting to. So, when a knock came at my door late in the afternoon, it startled me. I wasn't used to visitors, especially not out here in the middle of nowhere. I opened the door to find a woman standing there, her face weathered with age, her long gray hair cascading down her back in messy waves. Her eyes were an eerie blue, piercing, like they could see through me. She was holding a basket filled with what appeared to be homemade preserves, her fingers trembling slightly as she offered them to me. "Michelle?" she said, her voice low but steady. "I live just down the path. Thought I'd stop by and introduce myself. I bring you gifts." "Thank you," I said, my voice cautious but polite. I wasn't used to these kind of rural exchanges, but I accepted the basket. I'm glad to meet you." Her smile was thin, not unfriendly, but unsettling. It made me feel like there was something she wasn't telling me. "Remember, always keep your lanterns full, your windows shut tight, and your wits sharper than racks," she said cryptically, her voice dipping lower on the last part. I smiled awkwardly, unsure of how to respond. Thanks for the advice, Michelle," I said, stepping back to close the door. She didn't move, though. Her gaze remained fixed on me as if she was waiting for something. Then, as though satisfied with whatever unseen measure she had taken, she nodded and turned, disappearing down the path without another word. I stood there for a long time, the weight of her words lingering in the air. Lanterns full, windows shut tight. What was she talking about? It all seemed so strange, but I didn't dwell on it. I had enough to think about. That night a storm rolled in, a heavy, unforgiving downpour that slapped against the cabin's roof like 1,000 tiny hammers. I sat by the fire, reading a book I had been meaning to finish for months, but the storm raged outside, making it difficult to concentrate. The wind howled through the trees, bending the branches, and the occasional flash of lightning would illuminate the cabin in eerie, brief stabs of light. Suddenly, there was a knock on the door. I froze. It was late, too late for a visit. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my heart began to race, my mind immediately leaping to all the worst-case scenarios. Maybe Michelle had forgotten something, or maybe it was some kind of animal knocking against the door. But no, this was different. The knock was deliberate, rhythmic. Someone wanted to be let in. I hesitated before slowly making my way to the door. My hand hovered over the knob, my mind spinning with possibilities, none of them good. Finally, I opened the door, and there she was, Michelle. But something was off. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with panic, and her clothes were drenched, water dripping onto the floor. "I saw someone near your woodpile," she whispered urgently, her voice trembling. I took a step back, confused. "What are you talking about? Who?" She glanced over her shoulder as though she expected someone or something to be lurking just outside. "I don't know," she said, her voice low, "but you need to be careful. Don't go out there. Not tonight. Not in this storm. It wasn't supposed to be like this." My stomach dropped. My first instinct was to dismiss her as crazy, but the look on her face, utter terror, was enough to make me second-guess myself. I grabbed my flashlight, my mind racing. "You didn't see anyone?" She shook her head, but I could tell she wasn't sure. "I don't know, just please keep your lanterns full and your windows shut tight." And then, as suddenly as she'd arrived, she turned and walked back into the storm, disappearing into the rain-soaked night. I stood there for a moment, frozen. What had just happened? Who had she seen? And why did she seem so afraid? I shut the door, locking it behind me, and stood in the middle of the room. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Hours later, after I'd tried to calm myself down, I woke to the sound of a branch snapping outside my window. My breath hitched. Something, or someone, was out there. I crept out of bed, my flashlight trembling in my hand. I moved toward the window, my pulse racing. At first I didn't see anything, just the howling wind and the trees swaying in the storm. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, Michelle. She was standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the tree line, staring at my cabin with an intensity that made my skin crawl. She didn't move, just stood there frozen in place as if she were waiting for something or someone. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she turned and disappeared into the woods. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What the hell was she doing out there? And why was she watching me? The next morning I decided I needed answers. I couldn't let it go. I marched to Michelle's cabin, my mind set on getting to the bottom of this strange encounter. When I arrived, I froze. Her cabin was abandoned. The wood was rotting, the windows covered in dust, the door hanging off its hinges. It was like no one had lived there in years, but I'd just spoken to her the night before. My stomach twisted. I felt the familiar panic creeping up again. Who had I spoken to? What had I seen? I turned and walked back to my cabin, my head spinning. But even as I tried to push the thoughts from my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just uncovered something terrible, something that shouldn't have been disturbed. That night, I kept the lanterns full, and I kept my windows shut, tight, just like Michelle had warned me. But even so, I couldn't help but wonder, was I really alone out here? Or had something far more sinister been lurking in those woods all along? And then, as the wind howled through the trees, I realized that I might never find out, not without paying a price I wasn't willing to pay. Every Christmas Eve, Catherine and I had a tradition, a quiet late-night drive from my family's house to hers. The streets would be deserted, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off the snow. The world felt still, like it was, holding its breath for Christmas morning. It was peaceful, intimate, just the two of us in the car, the rhythmic hum of the tires on the road, and the soft Christmas music playing in the background. We didn't need much more than that. But last Christmas, everything changed. The night had been perfect up until then. My parents' house was warm, filled with laughter and the smell of homemade pie. Catherine and I had exchanged gifts, and her smile was all I needed to feel complete. It was the kind of night you wish would never end, but like all good things, it did. We said our goodbyes and headed out onto the road, the car's headlights cutting through the darkened, snow-covered streets. The drive should have been just like any other, but something felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling, an unease that crept up my spine, just beyond my reach. The road was empty, not another car in sight, and the only sound was the soft crunch of snow beneath our tires. The wind whispered outside, carrying with it the scent of winter. It was the perfect setting for a Christmas drive. As we drove, the silence between us wasn't awkward, but comfortable. Catherine was leaning against the window, looking out at the falling snow, her breath fogging up the glass. I glanced over at her, a soft smile playing on my lips. Then my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, not recognizing the number. It wasn't unusual. Sometimes people would call with blocked or unknown numbers, but I wasn't in the mood for telemarketers. "Don't answer it," Catherine murmured from beside me. She must have seen the frown on my face as I stared at the screen. "I won't," I muttered, swiping the screen to silence the call. But it wasn't the last one. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. Same unknown number. I ignored it again, my attention on the road ahead. But then, again, a third call. The same number. "Ignore it, Luke," Catherine said, her voice a little more tense now. Her gaze was fixed out the window, but there was something in the way her hands were gripping her seatbelt that made my heart race. "I'm not answering it," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. But then, as if the universe had conspired to make this a night of strange occurrences, it rang again. The fourth time, a brief surge of annoyance flared in me. Fine," I muttered, gripping the wheel with one hand while I answered with the other, ready to curse whoever was spamming me. "Hello?" I snapped, my voice edgy. The voice that responded was low, almost a whisper, but clear as day. "Hello, Luke." A chill immediately shot down my spine. I froze, my grip tightening around the steering wheel. I glanced at Catherine, who was now staring at me, her face pale. She must have heard the voice too. It was a voice I didn't recognize. And then, the voice continued, its words cutting through the silence like ice. "I know you, Luke. I know everything about you." My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't some random spam call. This wasn't a telemarketer. This was different. He listed off details, my home address, the name of my parents, even the color of the sweater I was wearing. How do you know all of that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible, the words sticking in my throat. Before I could gather my thoughts, he spoke again, and this time the words hit like a ton of bricks. "I'm not here for you, Luke. I'm here for Catherine." The air in the car seemed to freeze. Catherine gasped beside me, her eyes wide with fear. I could hear the rapid beating of my own heart in my ears, drowning out everything else. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. I slammed on the brakes, the car jerking as I pulled over to the side of the road. The tires skidded on the icy surface, and the sudden motion caused Catherine to grab my arm in a panic. "Luke, stop!" she screamed, but I couldn't. I was shaking, my breath ragged, trying to process the nightmare unfolding before me. "Who is this?" I demanded, my voice shaky but loud. But the line was silent. I said, "Who is this?" I repeated, my fingers gripping the phone so tightly it was almost painful. But there was nothing. No response, just the sound of static in my ear. Then, before I could react, Catherine snatched my phone from my hand and ended the call. "Why did you do that?" I snapped, my heart still hammering in my chest. "What the hell is going on? Do you know who that was?" She didn't say anything, at first. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with fear, her face pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know who that was, but Luke, I don't like this. I don't like this at all." I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. The car was still running, the engine idling in the cold night. My mind raced, replaying the words of the caller. How did he know my name? How did he know Catherine's name? But what terrified me the most was the calmness in the voice, the way he spoke like he knew exactly what he was doing. The rest of the drive was eerily silent. Neither of us spoke. Catherine didn't ask me any questions, and I didn't have any answers. The weight of the unknown pressed down on us like a suffocating fog. My eyes kept darting to the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights in the distance following us, but nothing. The road stretched out in front of us, empty. It was the same stretch of road I'd driven 100 times before, but tonight felt like an entirely different world. The snow had picked up, swirling in the headlights like some kind of ghostly mist. And then, my phone rang again. I flinched, my stomach dropping. Catherine reached for it this time, but I stopped her. "No," I said, my voice hoarse. "Let it ring." But the phone didn't stop ringing. It just kept going, the same unknown number flashing on the screen. I looked at Catherine, who was staring at me, her eyes wide. "Are you going to answer it?" she asked, her voice trembling. I didn't want to. I didn't want to hear that voice again, the one that had chilled me to the bone. But I knew I had no choice. With shaking hands, I reached for the phone and answered it. Nothing. Silence. Just the faint sound of breathing on the other end. "Catherine," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. "He's here, he's watching us." And that was when I heard it. A soft knock on the window. Catherine screamed and I spun around in my seat, my eyes darting across the empty road. There was nothing. No one. Just the snow and the shadows. But as I looked back at the phone, I saw a message pop up on the screen. "I'm right behind you, Luke. And I'm still here for Catherine." A cold sweat broke out across my skin. The drive wasn't over. Not by a long shot. And the worst part? I had no idea who was out there. But I knew one thing for sure. He was coming for us. The eerie calm of the night, the phone calls from strangers, and the shadows that lurk in the quiet corners of our world. These stories remind us how fragile the line between reality and nightmare can be. But remember, every mystery has its twist and every fear has its origin. If you enjoyed these spine-chilling tales, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. What do you think of these mysterious encounters? Have you ever experienced something that made you question everything? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your own creepy experiences. And if you want to see more stories like this, hit the notification bell so you never miss another tale from the unknown. Until next time, keep your wits sharp and your lanterns full. Who knows what might be lurking in the shadows? Stay safe and sleep with one eye open. See you in the next one.